Hi everyone, welcome to day 3 of our agent training. Today is going to be a very, not intense day, but exciting day. We have a lot to cover. We are going to go over buyer agency, buyer presentations, offers, and procuring cause. We do have a guest speaker coming a little later in the program today, but we have a lot of materials. I haven't said it in the days before, but I should have. All of the PDFs that we're using, all of the manuals are in CareerDen in the library under PowerPoints. And then if you go to 4-week agent training, every single day is in there. The PDFs are in there, so the manuals that we are referring to every single day, and the PowerPoints are there as well. And if you have any questions or can't find those, just email me and I will either email it to you or help you find it. So let's begin. Today we're really going to concentrate on what it is to be a buyer agent and how to build relationships with our buyers. And we have a lot to present to you, a lot of good reference material for you to use, and I will show you where all of that is. So a buyer agent or a buyer broker, sometimes referred to as buyer agency or buyer agents, represent the buyer in a real estate transaction. Buyer agency is defined as follows: a principal-agent relationship in which the broker is the agent for the buyer with fiduciary responsibilities to the buyer. Remember, we talked about those yesterday. What does that mean? It means that the buyer agent is tied to the buyer and that all the agent's loyalties are to the buyer. Although the benefits of buyer agent are obvious, remarkably many individuals still do not know they can have their own real estate agent look out for their best interests. So here are some of the steps that we're going to go through today, and probably not in the order that they're written here. But the agency disclosure is something that we've already talked about, and obviously that needs to be filled out at the first meeting, and you are going to say that you're representing the buyer. Remember that this is a statement, it's not a contract, but it does need to be signed by both of the people that you are taking out, and we are a designated company, so you are a designated buyer's agent. We are in a minute going to go through the buyer presentation, which is also in LAER CareerDen. We're going to talk about the buyer agency contract. We're going to talk about buyer questionnaires and how to get to know your buyers by going over their wish lists, their desires, their priorities, and how those might change as you're looking for a home. We're also going to talk about setting up your buyer lead in Boston Logic. And then later on in the day, we are going to talk about procuring cause, and we have a guest speaker coming in to refer to that. So let's start at the beginning. We're going to go through the buyer agent presentation that's in CareerDen, and that's what I'm going to show first, so that you know that these resources are all there for you whenever you need them. So give me 1 second to get over to that, which is right here. So again, this can be found in CareerDen in the library, and there is a section called Buyer and Seller Presentations, and this is here. Now, this is written, when you become an agent with LAER, Felicia sends you a customized or a personalized copy of this and the seller presentation. You should look at it in its original form and then make it your own. Add your bio, add your testimonials. It's easy to insert another page or to cut a page out that you don't want in there. But remember that you should always be talking about yourself, your team if you're part of a team, and your company, especially if you're new to real estate, because somebody might say to you, how many houses have you sold? You could say, well, my company has sold this many in your town, or something like that. So you always want to talk about how proud you are to be part of LAER Realty Partners. So these are the slides that are in there that talk about us and our partnerships, the people that are there as part of your team. Talk about the company, that we are the third largest in New England, that we just received an award for being one of the top places to work. Uh-oh. There was a problem loading this document. So should I re-download it here?
Yeah.
Hang on.
And then,
Let's see if we can reopen it. That looks better. Thank you. So we were here. Part of again what you want to say when you're meeting with a buyer is that you are a realtor, and there's real importance to that. There are actually TV commercials out that talk about why work with a realtor, and you want to understand. You yourself want to understand how proud you should be to be a realtor. Shauna mentioned that yesterday, wearing her pin. But the fiduciary responsibility, knowing the rules, why work with a realtor. It's very important for them to understand the guidance and the fiduciary responsibility that they're going to get, and why that is compounded in a positive way by working with someone who is a realtor. You can help with contracts and with negotiations, and live by the code, follow the code of ethics, which we're going to go over tomorrow. That's really important to remember to talk to your buyer about, so that they know that they're being well represented by you. To find you the ideal home in the shortest amount of time with the most favorable terms and with as little hassle as possible. You also want to make sure that you say to them that you're going to be there to keep the lines of communication open and help them through every step of the transaction from beginning to end. They should understand that you're working as a team, that the cooperation and the communication will always be there. Go over the things that you promise to do for them to help them understand the steps of the transaction. We will go over those a little bit more as well. And we're also going to go over quite a bit of what are they looking for. As you're building the relationship, you want to ask questions about what is on their wish list. What would they like differently in the new home versus the home that they're living in now? We're going to go over that in a few minutes. Now, getting organized. Now that we know what you're looking for, let's put the pieces together. So tomorrow we have Friday, we have Sarah Bear coming in from Ross Mortgage, and she's going to talk about how important it is to get your loan officer in early in the process so that people understand the steps of getting a pre-approval done and knowing what they're comfortable with, not putting themselves over the top so that they're eating hot dogs and beans 5 nights a week. We want you to be comfortable and have that knowledge up front. So it's really important in the very beginning to say, I recommend that you get pre-approved, not just pre-qualified. Pre-approval means that the lender has collected and reviewed your tax returns, pay stubs, bank statements, and has run a credit report. You will absolutely need a pre-approval as opposed to a pre-qualification letter prior to making an offer on a home. 2 things about that. Ross Mortgage, and again, Sarah will talk about this Friday, they can send you the application to be done online. It's that simple. You don't have to go in and meet with them. And the second thing is, I say get this done and have the pre-approval in your back pocket so that if we're out looking at houses Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock and you're ready to write an offer, you have to have that pre-approval letter as part of the offer package that we are sending in. So it's important to get that part of it done. There are 4 key factors to consider: the down payment, your ability to pay for a mortgage, the closing costs associated with your transaction, and your credit. The down payment we're going to go over that. We're going to do a practice offer in a little while. And that's important for them to understand that we are a two-contract state. We have an offer and we have a purchase and sale agreement, and there is escrow money needed for both of those. It's usually $1,000 down on an offer, and the percentage on the second deposit, the purchase and sale agreement, could be a variety of things, depending on whether they're doing an FHA loan, whether they're doing a conventional loan, whether they're putting 20% down to not have to pay PMI, all sorts of situations. But I can't believe that sometimes there are people that say, oh, I didn't know I needed any money down. I thought that would just come out of the proceeds of my house. So you really need to be upfront with them, even if they've already owned a home, so that they understand, yes, you do need some money up front. The other thing is we do have TRID in place, which is a new federal law for complete disclosure. Again, I think it's really important to have your buyers be as knowledgeable about the entire process as they can be. And the bank's role in that is to give them the closing costs ahead of time as well, which can range anywhere from $5,000 to $12,000, let's say. But they need to have an understanding of that so that that's not a surprise to them 3 weeks down the road. And I know that the loan officers at Ross are very good at helping the client to understand all of that. That's not for us to get into, but to say that that's part of the process. Qualifying. Most lenders require that your monthly payment range between 25 and 28% of your gross monthly income. Your mortgage payment to the lender includes the following items: the principal of the loan, the interest of the loan, the property taxes, and the homeowner's insurance. I think the majority of places, if not all, are asking for 12 months of your homeowners ahead of time. So I always say that you've got the four things: principal, interest, real estate taxes, and your 12 months of homeowner's insurance. That's all part of your final mortgage payment. If it's a condo, then you have the surprise of having the condo fee on top of that, which can range anywhere from $100 a month to $800 a month. It can really, so let's say your whole package came out to $2,500, and then it's a condo, and you have to add, of course, the homeowners would be a little different in a condo, but that's another story. But your total monthly PITI and all debts from installments to revolving charge accounts should range between 33 and 38% of your gross monthly income. So again, this is why it's so important to get them set up with a loan officer. You're not the knowledgeable loan officer person. Let them do their job to help your clients feel more comfortable and confident as they start the buying process. I love this one. If you're thinking of giving some information to your buyers, it's amazing how foolish people can be. Oh yeah, I just bought a new boat to go with my waterfront house that we have under agreement. And unfortunately, then the bank checks your stuff, or they just opened a new credit card in the middle of the real estate transaction. No. Do not change jobs, become self-employed, or quit your job. Do not buy a car, truck, or van, or you will be living in it. That's a cute joke. Do not use charge cards excessively or let your accounts fall behind. Do not spend money you have set aside for the closing. Do not omit debts and liabilities from your loan application. Do not buy furniture. That's a hard one to do when you're about to buy a new house. Do not create any inquiries to your credit. That's a good one. Do not make large deposits without first checking with your loan officer. Do not change bank accounts, and do not co-sign. So the two about the deposits, I know that some people like to not float, but transfer their money, let's say they have 3 or 4 accounts and they flip things around, I say to them in the beginning, and I'm sure the loan officer does, don't do that. Don't play with those accounts, because every single transfer or deposit you make has to be sourced and explained to your loan officer. So just don't do it. So this is really good warnings. I mean, some of us might think, gee, why do you have to say that? Wouldn't everybody understand it? But it's really a nice reminder to just play it cool during the transaction, because underwriting is checking you. And they will go in for a last-minute check right before the closing to see if any situation has changed. How to buy a great home. There are many factors to consider when selecting a neighborhood that is right for you. Following are just a few of the many factors you may want to think about that are important to you as well. Remember, what we're looking at is the buyer presentation. I would have some of these done ahead of time. Matt was saying that this morning. Have them with you, have them in your car, because this is vital information that you can give to them to take, that talks about the process. Scout the neighborhood. It's important that you scout the neighborhood in person. You live in more than your house. Talk to the people who live there. Drive through the entire area at different times of the day, during the week and on weekends. Look carefully at how well other homes in the area are maintained. Again, your priorities might be totally different than somebody else looking in a neighborhood. It might be how close is it to Route 93, because I have to commute into Boston, or who knows what. I had somebody years ago that came here, I think from Canada maybe, and all they wanted to look at was towns that had hockey rinks in it. So I had to do some unique research and just show them towns that had, that was their priority. I mean, it's different for everybody, but if they're a relocation person coming into the Boston area for the first time, they should drive around a little bit and see how the towns are set up. What do they want to be in a rural area? Do they want to be in an urban area? I always say that I try to play Switzerland. Somebody might say to you, I want to be within 10 minutes of work, and somebody might say, I don't care if I'm 45 minutes away. I don't mind driving if it means that I'm more out in the country in Winchendon and I get a better value for my package of buying a house. So that's why the listening, it's not really profiling, it's understanding their wish list. And they may actually want the opposite of what they've come from. That could be too. Don't forget to look for these things. Look for things like access to major thoroughfares. Listen for noise created by commerce roads. Again, I think I talked about this one of the other days. I lived near the commuter train. I never heard it. We heard it maybe the first couple of days and then never did. Somebody might say, I don't want this at all. So, let them make that determination on your own. You're not going to steer them or put your own impression into it. Smell the air for adjacent commerce or agriculture. We do have towns in Massachusetts now that are protected farming towns. I know Dunstable is one of them, that if you move into that town, you can never complain about the beautiful big dairy farms that they have there. And a lot of people wouldn't know that, but those are protected farming communities. So that's a new. Check local civic, police, fire, school officials to find information about the area. Research things like soil and water. Look at traffic patterns. Find out neighborhoods, parks, schools, churches, libraries, whatever might be important to you. I have just become a certified RPR trainer, and we are going to learn a lot more about how RPR can help you with your clients getting an understanding of neighborhoods. And these are all statistics that come from NAR. It isn't you being judgmental about a certain neighborhood, because you wouldn't do that anyway. School reports, again, RPR is great at school information. And again, they've put that together. So that's not coming personally from you. And you're not saying, oh, you got to move into Billerica because the Kennedy Elementary School is wonderful, even though my kids went there. Open houses. Upon visiting any open house, make sure you let your agent hosting it know that you are working with a LAER partner agent so that the other agent knows you are fully represented. We're going to go over that too. We talked, I think, yesterday. Kiki showed that she has the open house passes that you can give when you go to an open house. Take notes on every home. It's another thing that I didn't pull up for today, but I could if we had time. If you go to Cloud CMA in MLS PIN, the buyer tour is wonderful. And for every house that you put on a tour, there is a note-taking section. So that the people can write down about the first house, gee, I love this house, but I wish the master bedroom was bigger, whatever it might be. Or I wish I had a backyard that was fenced for my dog. Offers and contracts. Once you have found the home you wish to purchase, you will need to determine what offer you will be willing to make on the home. It is important to remember that the most competition there is for the home. The higher the offer should be, sometimes even exceeding the asking price. Remember, be realistic. And we're going to go over that in a minute in Stacy's book, The 7 Secrets. Making offers you want the other party to sign. After we present an offer to the listing agent, it will either be rejected, accepted, or the seller could make a counteroffer. This is when we negotiate the terms. And then the second step is the purchase agreement, purchase and sale agreement, used as a standard document approved by our local real estate board. The purchase agreement constitutes your offer to buy, and once accepted by the seller, becomes a valid legal contract. For this reason, it is important to understand what is written on a contract to offer. I have included a copy here. So let's talk for a minute. I don't even know what that is. Let's stop for a second because we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, and we're going to go back to understanding meeting the buyers and going over the buyer agency contract. I'm going to skip back to the other PowerPoint. So the buyer agency contract. So remember that we've already done the agency statement saying that we're representing the buyer. The buyer agency agreement is when you talk to the buyer and they say, I want to look in Chelmsford and Westford for $350 to $450. And you write the terms of it, the length of time, what they have in their wish list, where they think they want to look. And sometimes this may be swayed if you're signing this contract with them before they've talked to the bank. That might be interesting because they might think they can go to $450, and then they find out when they talk to the bank that they're better off staying around $100. I'd rather have that realistic news so that I'm not showing them $450 houses when they really can't afford it. I'd rather have the buyer know that up front. The other thing that might change is they might say, I want Westford and Chelmsford, and then after looking for a couple of weeks, they might come to you and say, you know what, let's expand to Groton, Townsend, and Pepperell. So, that could change a little bit. But in doing a buyer contract, you are representing them as a client rather than as a customer. So your fiduciary responsibilities to them are greater than if they are just a client, just a a customer, excuse me. And the contract, I think I gave you each a copy of that anyway. For those of you who are going to listen to this later on and follow and find it in the library, it is on page 28, and it's called the Exclusive Buyer Agency Agreement. So it talks about the buyer's duties, it talks about the services, it talks about the compensation. So that's a tricky one, because you might be an agent who only works for 3%, and the co-broke that's being offered is 2.5%. So you have to explain to the buyer that your value and what you're providing for them is a 3%, and that they would pay the 0.5 point difference, or not. I mean, that's up to you to talk to them about. The date range is also in here. You know, are you going to do a buyer agent contract for 3 months or for 6 months? And it talks about the obligations. Buyer's obligation. The buyer will cooperate with the firm by providing all information necessary to evaluate the buyer's needs and qualifications, and the firm's representation and service, and the scope of services, and disclose dual agency, which we already went over. But this is, you know, to get both of these signed up front, going through page 31, is really a great thing to do, to have them understand. Again, going back to the buyer presentation, I would definitely give that to them at first meeting and say, these are all the things that I promised to do for you. Why is it important to work with a realtor? And so I will help you with this entire transaction. So that's all in here in these slides. Let's talk for a minute about the profiling. And I say that in the most positive way. When you're meeting with a client, you want to ask them, what is it that you're looking for? One of the things I could show you is an improv. We have a buyer campaign in there that beautifully talks about building a relationship. And it's the simple questions. Are you thinking to buy and sell? Where are you thinking to buy and sell? How much do you think you can afford? And what is on your wish list? I can't impress upon you how important this is to be a good listener. At first point of contact, meaning your buyer agency contract, but how that might evolve as you start looking. So let's say, and I'm going to say ahead of time, there are a lot of different buyer wish lists out there, but just give that to them in the beginning, because what it does is it gets their juices flowing. And it might be that they're living in a condo and they're going to their first single-family home. It might be that they've been in a small 2-bedroom ranch and now they're looking for a 4-bedroom colonial. So part of what they're leaving might be, and you might say, what would you like differently from the house you already own? That she might say, or I shouldn't be sexist about it, they might say, we want a bigger kitchen, or we'd like a play area for the kids, or another bedroom, or one more bathroom, or a 2-car garage, or the fenced yard for the dog or for the kids. But listen to all of this. Now, the reason I say that also is because when you're talking about having them sign the buyer agent contract, they might say in the beginning, we must have 1.5 acres plus of land, and we must have 2,500 square feet, whatever they must have. Those might level themselves out as they start looking, because this is why I feel you have to play Switzerland. If you watch Property Brothers or Love It and List It, you know, those shows show you exactly what they're trying to ascertain from the people is, what is it that you really want? And sometimes they don't know and they compromise in their own minds. they might say, I want a certain thing, but then they realize that that particular neighborhood has everything that they want, but it's only a half an acre of land. And it's not that they're settling, but if the composition of the house has everything that they needed, the extra bedroom, the extra bath, the playroom, a screen porch, and a fenced yard, they're like, well, maybe the land wasn't the most important thing. So all you're doing is being a good listener. So if that wish list evolves as your touring goes on, this is a great one, the second page, which says on a scale of 1 to 5, what are the priorities? And again, it might be different for each of them, you know? They might find out, this is like going to marriage counseling or something. I mean, they might find out about things. I never knew that you really missed having a 2-car garage. And, you know, we're tired of sharing a bathroom with the kids, and we'd like our own master suite, whatever. But this is a great way to find out about people, because you can help better serve them. And what can you take from the wish list? You can help better set up their search in MLS Pin or in Boston Logic or even in RPR. If you can actually do, if they've zeroed in on a house in RPR and you put the address in, you can go over on the right-hand side and go to advanced, and you can do all that specific research that you can get from here. If they say, I must have at least 2,500 square feet, or I must have an acre and a half of land, you can put all those constraints in. But then they might come back to you 2 weeks later and say, gee, we've only seen 2 houses come up in our search area. Well, that's because you put all these constraints on. Maybe we should broaden it out a little bit. But you have to let that happen to them. The other thing about looking is, so if they look the first couple of weekends and you listen to what they've said, that may help you to edit the search and more focus in, when they say, oh, I wish the master bedroom was bigger, or I wish there was a pantry off the kitchen, whatever it is, or I wish the laundry wasn't in the basement. That's one that we get quite a bit. So again, it's really important to be a good listener. And as I said, there is more than one buyer checklist out there to work on. This is another questionnaire. Again, it's just, use whatever you want, but use something so that you can get to understand them. You might have a first responder that has to be within a certain mileage of where he works. You don't have to be in the same town necessarily, but sometimes they'll say you have to be within 20 minutes of work or 25 miles of work, or whatever it is. You need to know those things. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is how to enter someone in Boston Logic to set up a buyer for a daily search. And for that, we are going to go to listen to Stacy for a second. In LAER University, the second module that we have in there is all about Boston Logic, and Stacy has just put about 15 videos in there on every single aspect of Boston Logic you ever want to know, including the third section is about customizing and personalizing your website. But the second section gives you how to do every single aspect of Boston Logic. So this is about entering a new client, and she's going to walk you through this if I can start it. There we go.
In today's Boston Logic tutorial, we're going to talk about how to quickly add a lead to your Boston Logic CRM. So we're looking at an agent Boston Logic site. In order to get into the back end, you'll have to log in through your admin, and we're going to go over to the top menu, At the very far left side, there is a button for leads. You can go here and click My Leads as well. Over in the right-hand corner, if you click on this box, these 4 little boxes in the upper right-hand corner, you can also add a lead by clicking that little plus sign where it says Leads. So you can either click there or go to the My Leads button. Once we get to the My Lead section, you click on the orange Create New Lead button. And it's as simple as putting in all of the client's information. So let's see. So a couple things to note is that if you want to be able to text your client, make sure you include a cell phone number. The system will let you put the lead in without a cell phone number, but then you will not be able to text listings directly from the system to the client. Also, it's going to prompt you to set up a password for the client. It's going to email. It will send an introduction email to the lead, and it will give them whatever password you put in here. So I'm going to just say 1234, 1234. It then asks you a bunch of other questions. None of this is mandatory, so you can just skip through all of this, but you can put the type of lead, create a lead status, like a new lead. So the lead types are like buyer, seller, renter, just looking, commercial, buying and selling. The lead statuses are like new leads, incubating leads, under agreement, closed, inactive, dead. And then you can prioritize your leads as well. So it lets you choose all of those. If you want to send an email confirmation to the lead, letting them know that they have been set up within your system, then keep this box checked. The instances where you would not want to have that box checked is sometimes you're just adding old past customers, people who you sold a house to 3 years ago. You may not want to have an email confirmation go to that client because they're an old customer. They're not looking for real estate right now. You're just putting the information in so you have all of your data in one spot. But if this is an active buyer or seller, then you will want to keep that box checked off. So an email confirmation is sent to the client with a password for them to log into the system. If you click on the button of additional details, it will allow you to add additional information. Their home address, their preferred contact method, where they work. You can include additional details about the lead. All of this can be added later as well. You're then checking off boxes under email settings. You're letting the system know if you want this client to receive daily search emails. So again, this is only if it's like an active customer, not someone, not a 3-year-old customer who you're just looking to put into your system, but rather you would want your client to receive daily emails if they're actively using your system to search real estate. You can also check off a box here if you want to receive a copy of any emails that go to the client. So if you want to also receive the daily search emails so you get the same email as the client gets, then you would just check off that button right there. And this is under email settings, all under the lead account. It then lets you put in birth dates, notes, as well as you can include any properties that they may own. So that's basically it. I mean, the only required fields that you have to do are first name, last name, email, and password confirmation. The rest is totally optional. Then you will do create lead. And then it takes a few minutes to process, but I want to show you the email that the client will get. This is a sample email. This is not the one I just put in because sometimes it takes a few minutes for that to go through. But this is the email that your client will receive. It just says, "Good afternoon. I'm pleased to let you know I've created an account for you on my website. This account allows you to create and receive email updates on properties that meet your criteria or save favorite properties to view later. Take advantage of this great service. They'll give you the address to log into your website, and then it'll give them their username and password. And the client's username is their email address, and the password is whatever password you have set up. So that is the introduction email that will go to the client once you have put the lead into the system. If you are looking to set up the search criteria on behalf of your client, please watch our quick tutorial in LAER University on how to set up searches for your clients so they don't have to do it. As well, I've also recorded a quick tutorial on how to change a client's password, which you can find in LAER University, just in case a client reaches out to you because they forget their password to get into the system. And that is it on how to set up a lead within the Boston Logic site.
So one of the important things about Boston Logic is the notes. And that's why I said, as you're building the relationship and getting to know the client, put those notes in there. What did they say after the first Saturday that you went out? Gee, these houses were okay, but next week can we do whatever? And the whatever may cause you to change the search criteria. So it's always good to understand that. So a couple more things before we get into the actual documents of the offer. When Matt had talked earlier today about having some stuff prepared, especially when you're driving around, have some buyer presentation stuff prepared. Have it with you at all times. And this is a great example of that, and I'm going to show it to you right now. This is Imprev, which again you can get to through the LAER Career Den. It is our marketing center, and we had Phyllis Cohen make all of these professional brochures for us. Has anyone looked at these? So there are, I think, 7 of them, and there's 2 in there that really talk about buyers. One I'm going to show you right now talks about, I think this one talks about 5 tools experienced buyer agents use to find exceptional homes and get offers accepted. I think there's another one in there that talks about when you're in a multiple offer situation. Look at these. Your admin can print these for you, and they're all branded to you personally. They're beautifully made and have a lot of great information. So again, what is it doing? It's differentiating you and making you stand out as a buyer agent because you're giving them all of this information to help them understand the process before you even get going. So print those out. Mary can print that for you in 2 seconds and just have it in your back pocket, or Gail or anybody. So those are there, as I said, in Imprev, under designs, under brochures, and they're all right there. They're really super to look at. The other thing that I wanted to mention was Stacy's book, How to Hire a Lion. Has everyone read it? You got it in your welcome package, though.
I do have.
Okay. So chapter 3, go to page 21 of today's manual. And secret number 3 talks about how to win in a bidding war. And we're really not going to go into this in detail, but know that it's there to use. Stacy talks about how to prepare an offer, what to prepare if you're writing an offer that's over asking price, to put the appropriate caps in there. To never, we're going to let our guest Craig Higgins talk in a minute about you're never going to play attorney and advise your clients to keep contingencies out of an offer. It's always their decision, but you would caution them to do it very hesitantly. In chapter 3 of Stacy's book, she talks about, are you going to write a letter with your offer or not? This has become a real big debate, whether people do or not. I had a house in East Chelmsford a couple of years ago that the people won because this is their letter. Their grandparents and parents lived in the neighborhood. They wanted to move back to the neighborhood that they had grown up in, mostly so that the grandparents could babysit for their new child. But that helped them win over the other offers because they knew of the neighborhood. Sometimes Sellers don't want to look at it. They just want the numbers that are in the offer, and they don't want to see the personalization of it. So how you present that or don't is something that it's not a one thing fits all. Multiple offers are probably going to happen a lot this spring, so you need to help your clients understand. We just mentioned earlier that sometimes the sellers may come back with a counteroffer. I think more and more lately, the sellers are not giving you the opportunity to counteroffer. So unfortunately, you have to go in with your best foot forward first, because you'd be surprised when the agent comes back and says, yeah, we chose somebody else. I'm like, well, you didn't even give us a chance to counteroffer. They didn't have to do that. So that's the unfortunate part of what's going on. Again, we'll let Craig talk about removing contingencies or not. There's an awful lot of risk to that, and we as agents are never going to suggest that and overstep our bounds as agents. Again, the professional brochures that are in here to help your people be educated, helping your buyer or your seller understand multiple offers, because it can get very confusing. So that's just another thing to think about. Look at Stacy's book, going back to the top. Secret 3 is all about how to win in a bidding war, and the different possibilities in every single situation is different. So we're going to now talk about offers, purchase and sale agreements, and procuring cause, and we're going to take a break and have our guest speaker come up, and we'll get ready for the second section of our day. Well, welcome back. We have with us today Craig Higgins, who is an attorney in Worcester. Is that correct? Marlborough. And Craig is also an agent in our Worcester office, and we are thrilled to have his comments today on procuring cause mostly, but we're going to talk about offers and purchase and sales first as part of our day of understanding the process with a buyer. So on page 32 of the manual, if any of you are following along or looking at the recording video after the fact, again, you can go to day 3 and look on page 32, and we have the examples of the offer there, which are, of course, also in dotloop. One of the things that I teach when I teach new agents is the 5 steps that are involved in an offer, and how this form does not really go by that. I should have something in bold that you know what, I'll do that right now. Anyway, the 5 steps are offer, home inspection, purchase and sale agreement, finance commitment, and closing. So I'm going to show you, let's just be silly about this, and I'm going to show you how silly this is. So here's the 2-page offer form that you always see. Step 1 is here. Step 2 is on the 2nd page. Step 3 is in the middle of the 1st page. Step 4 is at the bottom of the 1st page. And step 5 is actually paragraph 4. So try sitting with your buyer and explaining that to him. But what I always say in simplicity is that we have the 5 steps. We are a 2-contract state, unlike New Hampshire, which is a 1-contract state. So it is the offer, home inspection period, purchase and sale agreement, finance commitment, closing. It's very, very important to keep track of these dates. You are the one that's in charge of keeping them in contract, unless you have a transaction coordinator helping you. And we can talk later. I'll have a question as well about extensions and the fact that a seller doesn't have to accept an extension, right?
No, they do not.
So let's start at the beginning. When you make your offer, I mean, you might make it for 24 hours, whatever it is. You're going to write in the address of the property. Who was it introduced by? You. I always put my name and put LAER Realty Partners after that. So whatever the terms are of the property that you're purchasing. Then what are they offering? Remember, we talked about two amounts of escrow money, $1,000 down on the offer, and then whatever you're creating on the second part. We're really not going to go into that in great detail today. Paragraph 2, or step 2, is your inspection period. We talked about this a little yesterday, or was it Monday, about the different inspections that you can do. So your general inspection, Tiger Home Inspections, who will be speaking here next week, is roof to basement, soup to nuts. I always explain it that way, that it's all inclusive. But you can have extra things tested, such as radon, such as lead in the water. We talked about this on Monday. So that's all in, it starts at the bottom of the first page and goes on to the second page. There is a blank spot in there to put, usually we put 10 days. I always try to make it through one weekend, because let's say that your two clients are both doctors working in Boston. They work 80 hours a week, so it might be hard. And also, the home inspection companies themselves will get busier and busier as the spring season comes. So you want to allow some time for that. Number 3 is your purchase and sale contract. That is your second contract, and we're going to talk about that in much greater length in a minute when we go into the P&S and the attorney's involvement in that. But you want to, as you're talking about these 5 steps, you also want to be looking at the dates. You have to fill in a succession of dates. And this is another great thing to have a sample of in your possession if you're writing your first offer, to put, if you're giving them 24 hours for the offer and then you're giving 10 days for the home inspection period, then your purchase and sale would be like 14 days out, I would think. So you've got to make sure that everything is in a logical succession of order. So from paragraph 3 is your purchase and sale date. Then your next step is your mortgage contingency. So remember, the 2 contingencies that are covered in the offer that protect the buyer are the home inspection contingency and the mortgage contingency. This is how I do it, and I'd love to have your opinion on this. Whatever date you put in for the purchase and sale agreement, let's say it's March 1st. If you go to the very bottom of your mortgage contingency, it says right here, buyer shall have submitted an application by. I always put the day after the purchase and sale is signed. The reason I do that is because there is an application fee to be paid. Why would you want to pay that unless you have a fully executed purchase and sale agreement? Some buyers may have done that way ahead of time, and that's fine. That's their decision. But how do you feel about that?
So the last blank on this, where it says, so in no event shall the buyer be deemed to have used reasonable efforts to obtain financing unless the buyer has submitted one application by.
Right.
So that just, my taking of that is a buyer can't just wait a month and then start sending out applications for mortgages. There is as it says in here, the buyer shall use due diligence in trying to procure a mortgage. So that doesn't mean one mortgage application every 6 weeks. It's more like there's really no set and fixed terms, but like that blank does give the buyer a deadline to put mortgage applications in. But the same thing, seller shouldn't have to forego selling his property to other qualified buyers if there's one buyer who's just lackadaisically looking for mortgages.
We talked a little while ago about the early on, and remember it was in your LAER buyer presentation about them meeting with the loan officer. This is why helping them to understand, it's not that you're going to say that Ross Mortgage is the only company to use. They are our mortgage partner, but sometimes people will go floating all over the place, just searching out all these different companies saying, oh, I'm just going to pick the best rate and I'm just going to keep searching and floating without being committed. And that's kind of what Craig is saying too. You know, they're wasting a lot of time rather than getting going with the process, and they're enjoying, I hate to say the game, but they're not making a decision or a commitment. But there's a lot of ways to handle that. Going back up to the beginning of that, it says about the mortgage commitment date. This is a really important date. Now, remember who you're representing. You are the buyer agent representing the buyer. So if your closing, let's say, is going to be on April 1st, I would try to put the finance commitment out as far as I can. Remember, you're representing the buyer. We'll talk about the opposite of that, and Craig, feel free to chime in. The reason is, once you hand the fully executed purchase and sale agreement to the bank starts doing all of their underwriting, and then they send an appraiser out to tweak all of the work that they've done to the address of the property. As it becomes busier and busier, you may get an appraisal that doesn't come back quickly. I mean, some appraisals can turn around in 48 hours, some can take a little longer. So you're biding time, you're representing your buyer. Now, when you present this offer to the listing agent and the seller, they could come back to you and say, I don't like that date, it's too far out, I'd like you to pull that date in. They have a right to say it, and that may be a negotiating thing that happens. Do you find that happens sometimes?
Not so much in my experience as a realtor, but I mean, in learning as an attorney, sure. In a situation like that, if a buyer was to modify that, or the seller didn't like the buyer's terms for the mortgage contingency, the seller could always, when he does his reply, that would be like a contract provision for a counteroffer. He could accept all the terms, purchase price, et cetera, but in the counter offer would then come back with that to meet all the essential elements of a contract. And without an agreement on that, I mean, there very well could be no contract if they're disagreeing about all the essential provisions.
That's a good point. All the terms have to be met. So the problem with bringing it in sooner, let's say you bring it into March 15th, if March 15th is about to arrive and you've kept in touch with the mortgage company and the appraisal isn't back yet, they can give you what's called a conditional finance commitment. But if you at some point need to ask for an extension, I hate to say this, but I'm going to let Craig jump in again. The seller does not have to grant your extension. And have you run into that at all, or what would you say about that?
If you're seeking an extension beyond what you have
That's
in
right.
here, the seller doesn't have to grant it.
No.
These are the
Statistically,
Most of the time they will.
it's pretty rare.
Yeah. If you get, you make it a conditional finance commitment that says subject to appraisal, something like that. And, this is why you want to stay in nice communication with the other agent too, so that you have a good rapport going through this whole thing and say, you're representing your buyer. So all of the dates that you've put in here, I don't care how you keep them on your calendar, whatever, you need to know when that finance commitment date is coming up. And is it getting close and you still haven't heard from the bank? You may get down to that very last day and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you're still waiting and the bank closes at 4. And, so it's up to you to not have them be out of contract for many different reasons.
good communication too can always be a good substitute for attorneys enforcing contracts and arguing about small nuanced details. I mean, like she said, communicating with the other side and just agreeing upon it that way is always the more favorable way. Just in the event that doesn't happen is when these really come up.
On that point, I have a question. So more and more, when it's 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon and one of the attorneys has been in court all day long or whatever, and the attorneys decide to extend till Monday, So if the attorneys make a verbal agreement to extend, we as agents are fine with that. What I would hope, and I think what happens an awful lot, is the attorney representing your client will just let you know, say, we have verbally agreed to extend till Monday. As long as you have that in a text or any, say something about the attorneys verbally doing that, rather than us doing a form asking for the extension.
Of course, I mean, attorneys can always verbally agree on that stuff. I was at a closing, the registry deeds, like 3 weeks ago, and there was a form that we were supposed to have. One of the sellers, I was representing 2 sellers, one of them didn't show up, and we weren't anticipating to not show up, so we had to forego the closing that day for wait for his power of attorney. So we kind of just told the real estate agents we're going to handle this, and we ended up closing at like 7 o'clock that night. So
really?
The registry received it. They would have received it the following morning. But yeah, once you have, my take on it is once the attorneys are involved, they have all the essential paperwork, absent like any extreme deadlines for when the closing has to be, and like losing financing or whatever rare circumstance. It's always, attorneys can always agree, I mean, for small increments of time like that.
So now let's go to the next step, and Craig, I'd like you to help us with the script as well. So again, what we're doing today is understanding you're representing the buyer and you're walking them through these steps. So if they have an accepted offer, what happens next? You're doing your home inspection stuff, you've set that all up, but you're going to explain to them that the next step that's going to come is the purchase and sale agreement, and about the review of it, and the fact that the basic purchase and sale in Massachusetts favors the seller, right?
Correct.
So can you talk about how you would help your buyers understand the difference between the two and what's going to happen when the attorney reviews it?
So the difference between the two is so the offer to purchase is a step before the purchase and sales agreement. Just the buyer saying what they are offering the seller in consideration for the seller's home. After you have an accepted offer, that's when you'd move on to the purchase and sales agreement. And it looks like we have a standard New Hampshire form purchase and sales agreement. I don't know if there's a...
Nope, there is a Massachusetts one. Should be.
So yeah, there are standard through the Massachusetts Association of Realtors
Maybe not.
purchase and sales agreements. I actually also have on my laptop as well. So that really covers the essential terms. Mostly included what would be in the offer to purchase. It would describe the property, the purchase price, when the closing date is, whether there's any contingencies upon the purchase and sale or closing date. It would say the parties' names, the time and place of the closing. And once that is signed by both parties, that's when you have a binding valid contract, assuming there's no contingencies contained in that as well. And that's really what the attorneys would do. It's review the purchase and sales agreement, buyer's side, seller's side, go back and forth. Like I had one a month or 2 ago where there was a radon contingency in it, and the radon levels ended up showing up at a higher level, so then we had to work out credits, which are all on the HUD statement. But yeah, it's just going back and forth. And then, I mean, all purchase and sales agreements generally is like a general standard template as this, absent like different terms, different exceptions, different substituting names, and properties, prices, etc. I don't know if that covered it.
Yeah. Again, about the purchase and sale and an attorney review, the other thing that you might want to say, and again, this is script, is the bank can give you an attorney to review the purchase and sale who are acting in the bank's interest.
Correct.
But you also have a right to have a personal attorney, which very few people do, but you can never tell them, don't bother doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And
some people, some buyers really believe that the bank's attorney does represent their interests, but the bank's attorney works for the bank, protects the bank's interest. They won't tell your buyer about the benefits of procuring title insurance. And really, if a buyer buys a house and there is a claim against the title that somehow didn't get found, an issue arises where they need title insurance to defend against that claim. They're, for lack of a better word, SOL. The bank's attorney was representing the bank. Only having an attorney, hiring your own attorney that can represent you on any transaction is the best way to protect yourself on that. But again, most people do think the bank's attorney does represent them, and that's just not the case. They won't tell you about, and mainly the most important thing for a buyer is to have title insurance. It costs like pennies on the dollar, and it can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars in the event that the situation does arise where somebody's claiming adverse possession to your title. There's a lien that didn't get noticed in the chain of title, some issue arises with the property, and then you're looking at either paying $500 to $1,000 for this title insurance or $300,000 for that new home you just bought that you thought you were protected. So it's really, and a bank's attorney won't tell you about that. And that's why, whenever I do represent a buyer, I make sure they know that the bank's attorney is a separate entity from myself and doesn't necessarily protect their interests. They do protect the bank's interests. And
The other thing is that the agents should not be explaining the content of the purchase and sale agreement.
absolutely.
That's what the attorney is for. You are not attorneys, and you've got to be fair to yourself mostly and say, I'm not an attorney. If you want this explained, you have an attorney that is representing you. That's what you should talk to that attorney about.
Yeah, it's tough to teeter on that line between agent and crossing over being an attorney, but it's best to refer them to an attorney, tell them to contact an attorney with those specific questions. Because in the event something does go wrong and they say, oh, my agent said this, you're not only overstepping your bounds as a real estate agent, but you're also putting your customers in a potentially catastrophic situation, depending on the scope of it. But it's always best to just defer to an attorney.
The other thing about that is, I just forgot my thought on that. Yeah, you really want to be careful not to put yourself in that situation. They may say, well, I just want you to tell me that, and just say, I'm not an attorney. The two different ways, and not to simplify it, but the ways the changes are made, again, we represented that the purchase and sale in its draft form favors the seller. You sometimes see an attorney, maybe not so much anymore, you sometimes see an attorney that'll mark up different sections of the purchase and sale, and then you sometimes see an attorney that'll just add an addendum that changes things out. Do you see it both ways?
Yes, so an addendum, really case-by-case situation. An addendum would be more appropriate if there was a certain section within the purchase and sale that didn't cover what the addendum covers, whereas you can modify any of these sections. Really case-by-case. If there was something that wasn't really foreseen when they were doing the purchase and sales agreement, that would be appropriate grounds for an addendum. But it's just really case by case. I wish I could come with an example right now off the top of my head on this.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about clear title?
Clear title?
Yeah.
Sure. So clear title means that I'm passing you a title that's clear of liens, which the lien is a claim of somebody else. There's mechanics liens, there's estate recovery unit liens in Massachusetts, encumbrances, so really any claims to the title that would prevent me from passing it to you. And in order to, so the grantor is the person who's conveying it, grantee is the person who's receiving it. A grantee can only receive as good of title as a grantor had. So I can't give you a clear title if I don't have clear title to a property. So clearing, a mortgage is an encumbrance on a title too. That's why you need a discharge recorded with them.
One of the things we find an awful lot is that a deed or whatever it is wasn't fully recorded. You know,
Yeah.
they never followed the process through, and it sounds like a simple thing, but it can really mess stuff up.
Yes, then you'd have to re-record the deed. So then that one would be recorded so you can have a chain of title. This is stuff when an attorney represents either buyer or seller, they'll do a title search with the registry of deeds. They'll look back generally 50 years, look up the chain of title, make sure that grantor back in 1980 passed title clear to this grantee, then the subsequent one clear title. And I'm just really looking up the chain of title. And frequently, I mean, there's stuff you have to look at, see if there's a mechanic's lien, notice of claim from somebody filing, like whether it's Mass Health, frequently in Massachusetts. There's always something that can prevent you from passing clear title, and that's again like another protection that title insurance gives to a buyer too. So if they do purchase a property, doesn't have clear title, a title insurance company will pay the cost to defend them in that defense of the title and satisfying that. So it just, yeah, clear title. You need clear title to pass a house, but when the issues arise when there is no clear
And
title.
again, remember who you're representing here. You're representing the buyer. So you're saying that's what the attorney is doing to protect you so that when you take possession of this house, it's free and clear from whatever has happened. We're going to go back now to page 11 and talk about procuring cause, which is not an easy conversation. But this is about communication with your buyers and communication with the other agents. Sometimes I would call the other agent and say, I have a buyer that may be attending your open house on Sunday. Is that okay? I mean, I have agents call me and do the same thing, and I always say, fine. On page 11, Kiki talked about this yesterday. We have a template, actually, that you can do an open house pass so that when you go into an open house, if you go without your agent, that they know that you're working with someone else. So in the procuring cause, to understand having this discussion with your buyers, it is important that you have a conversation with your buyers on what to do when they see a home that they are interested in looking at. If the buyers see a sign, they need to know to call you, not the number on the sign. If they see an open house they want to attend, they need to know to call you so that you can accompany them or get prior permission, which is what I just said, for them to attend the open house. If they see a for sale by owner sign they are interested in, they should get the contact information for the seller and call you. It may sound redundant to say these things, but sometimes you think the buyers understand that they should do that, and they don't. And then you're left picking up the pieces. Procuring cause issues are often caused when uneducated buyers end up going to look at a home with a real estate agent different than the one whom they signed the buyer-agent contract with. So just in that statement alone, you have a buyer-agent contract with them, and yet they've gone to an open house, and then the listing agent's like, oh, I got a new lead. If the buyer looks at a home without you, that other agent may be entitled to a commission under the rules of procuring cause. If the buyer also signed a buyer-agent contract with you, the buyer may be obligated to pay you a commission. But that doesn't mean that it has to come from the other agent. In other words, it's really important to discuss with the buyer what the buyer should do when they find the real estate they want to look at. The buyers must understand the importance of always contacting you. It should be also noted here that it's extremely important that when your clients do call or email you, that you respond quickly. If you do not return the call and the buyer looks at the home with someone else, you may have no recourse for collecting a commission. This is where communication is so key. Not only your response to them, but your text, your emails, that consistent, and we're going to let Craig speak about this too, but you may have to prove that you did talk to them, that you followed up with them, whatever it was. If you do not have a signed buyer-agent contract and the buyer looks at a home with another agent, there will be little you can do to negotiate a commission on this transaction, as the showing agent will likely achieve procuring cause status to keep the client. So going back, that's why the buyer-agent contract is so important from the beginning, to say that they are committed to you and you are committed to them. Consider giving your buyers open house passes, which they give to the agent hosting any open house. These are available in the Career Den library under open houses. There are 4 to a sheet. The template is there. So let's talk about that for a minute. It's so subjective, the different circumstances that come up with this. It's the he said, she said. The listing agent will say, well, the buyer never said they were working with you. So, then it's, what do you do? How do you prove anything? Every situation is going to be different. Have you had any instances of that? Or?
I mean, I know the best way in
Yeah.
that would be to have your buyer sign an agency agreement,
Yeah.
Some sort of contract with you, so that, this is a beautiful idea too, the open house pass, so that way they'll know, the listing agent will know that you are representing the buyer. Again, I've never experienced this personally, but I mean, what is to say, if you have a few conversations with even a month worth of conversations to a certain buyer, you never get that listing or agency agreement signed, and then they go to an open house, and then the listing agent on that side swoops in. I mean, you don't have the agency agreement. It's really tough to find any recourse there. I mean, I'm sure the good attorney could find some sort of avenue, but I mean, protect yourself with signing the agency agreement with the buyer, and then contacting the other agent at the open house, or just any way to show your involvement with the transaction rather than just be a passive party, and just be more active in your involvement.
So it may happen. Let's say that there's only one time that there's a first open house with a new listing. A lot of times they will say first showings and first open house Sunday 12 to 2. And let's say that that you are doing an open house yourself on another listing. So you're not able to go at the time that open house is for your buyer. That's the instance when I would call and introduce myself to, I would do 2 things. I would introduce myself to the listing agent and say, look, I have an obligation that day, or whatever you want to say, and say, would it be okay if my buyers came to your open house? I feel that if we're going to talk about code of ethics tomorrow, but I feel that if she is doing a service for her seller, she's going to say, that's fine. That's what I always do, is say, that's fine. But then what I would do is I would go back myself later that day, or even at that time say to her, I can't come from 12 to 3, but could I make an appointment to see the house at 4 o'clock? So that you've been to the house, you're knowledgeable about the house, and then you can talk to your clients later that afternoon if in fact it was something that they liked, that they wanted to see. Just cover yourself and have that communication with the listing agent, but to have had, as it says on this page, it's so important to have those conversations with your clients ahead of time, because they're going to be impetuous on a weekend. And, oh, I didn't know I needed to bother you to go to an open house. I mean, you're like, are you kidding me, We have a question, the question from Oshi. What is the cost of running a title search, and does it fall on the buyer?
So the cost of a title search depends. I mean, most title companies will be $250 for an independent title examiner. This is something that, a buyer's side attorney would just do in his representation on the transaction. But really, if the title search is really imperative, like when you're getting title insurance. So they kind of go hand in hand, but a title search, shouldn't be more than $250 for an independent one. But again, most attorneys will just include it as part of their representation of the client or the buyer, seller, etc.
Yeah, as long as we're talking about that, can we talk a little about TRID and about the outlining of the closing costs ahead of time so that they would know that the title search is listed out in that?
Yes, so TRID requires a disclosure of all closing costs on the HUD statement, formerly known as a closing disclosure form. That requires an outline of all the closing costs on it. I don't know if we have a template in here. That would be.
No,
it
I
really
don't
goes
think I have.
through. It breaks down everything from the cost of the house, the principal amount, the interest, who's paying, how much the buyer's agent's getting, how much the seller's agent's getting, attorney's fees associated with it, whether there's any set offsets. There's like a hypothetical like rate on offset, any credits that the sellers do or buyer based on the amount placed in the escrow account. So it really just covers and it covers more than I just said from right there too. But it really just itemizes all of the costs associated with it, so that way the buyer, both parties really have like a full and fair disclosure of the where the money's going, how it's going, and the exact figure and what they can expect based on that.
Going back, one more thing I'd really like to go over. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, she's asking another question. Does it itemize actual numbers or just who's responsible for paying?
Both. So it says who's responsible. So there's like two columns that goes down like the whole thing.
So
Bless you.
can you, she's kind of a newer agent, and I'm very glad she's asking these questions. Can you explain to us shortly why TRID was put into effect to protect the buyers?
Yeah, so TRID is put in, I mean, pretty much out of a consumer protection, particularly like people involved in real estate, buyers and sellers, so they can be aware of all the disclosures. They can't be, be getting like astronomical rates, just have it hidden in the paperwork somewhere. It's really so that they're aware of what their costs are, and I mean really just so they're informed. It covers, I mean, really everything. Even my fees have to be on the closing disclosure form, and then it says who pays it. I mean, it's kind of case by case too, so whether it's like a cash transaction or it would be more thorough for a finance transaction because that would include all the lender's costs, etc. But for a straight cash transaction, it would be, I mean, just your normal costs, like right on who pays the costs, whether it's a title search. A title search would be included on there. Title insurance would be included on there. Buyer side, seller side attorney, buyer side, seller side agent. Escrow amounts, where that's going, whether it's going back to the buyer, whether it's applied to the closing costs. Recording fees, there's also recording fees. So I think it went up to 125 as of January 1st, so that has to be on there. Title insurance as well would also be on there.
This is a real, as Craig said, it is consumer protection, but this is another thing that is more transparent up front, and I think that's why the government did it, is so that people aren't surprised. What was happening years ago was you get 3 weeks into it and a bank would say, oh yeah, we forgot to tell you about this fee and that fee, and you're like blindsided by it. So this way they know up front, and it's just much more transparent to have all of those figures up front. Sarah will talk more about this on Friday. The one other big thing, Craig, that I'd like you to go back and talk about was what we mentioned before about the risk of taking contingencies out. As we get into multiple offer situations, people are going to think about taking the home inspection contingency out, thinking about taking the mortgage contingency out, and even thinking about taking out the subject to the sale of their home out.
Yes, so a contingency in an offer really conditions my performance under this offer on the event, on a future event. So I mean, contingent, so I can make my offer conditioned or contingent upon my obtaining of a mortgage, or my obtaining of an inspection, or whatever I make it contingent upon. If you erase that, then your offer doesn't contain that escape clause. That's why I'd call it contingency. It's a means for a buyer to really escape, their liability on this. Say if an inspection, say they waive the inspection, and then it turns up that there's the foundation of the house needs like $100,000 in repair, and they waived their inspection contingency in there, then the buyer still has to take the house. The seller could sue to have them specifically perform their obligations under this contract, because under the laws of contract, they're the ones, they waived their contingency. That's a means to really protect yourself, but like you said, in like a hot sale where it'd be like a bunch of people, bunch of offers, really trying to get it sold and trying to have your offer stick out. You can always waive that, but you got to be ready to bear the consequences in the event it goes through, and then you waive the inspection. That's buyer beware. If you waive an inspection, it's for that, although you're trying to make your offer seem more competitive or more appease the seller more, you're still gonna be liable. You're the one that didn't want to have the inspection, and an inspection would have revealed X, Y, and Z issue with the property, but because you chose to forego having that inspection, it's buyer beware. You're liable for whatever that is. And that's not an excuse to back out of the contract either.
No. And the more important one is the mortgage contingency.
Yes.
That's crazy.
So mortgage contingency, generally speaking, so your mortgage contingency is contingent upon you obtaining a mortgage at prevailing rates, which that's again like in it's subjective. So a prevailing rate for somebody with a 800 credit score is going to be different prevailing rate for somebody with like a 620 credit score. And if in a situation is that, the buyer doesn't pursue any mortgages, or the buyer just decides like, hey, I like to sleep all day and I'm never going to look for a mortgage, the seller, the buyer could forfeit their deposit that's held in escrow. There could be, there could be consequences on that. Whether or not a seller would be able to recover the whole purchase price against a buyer who doesn't even have any money, probably not. But there's other ways to, for the seller to recuperate their monies that were lost while they were waiting on the buyer. Whether that's, the difference between the next purchase offer that the seller decided to forego to pursue this one, or unanticipated costs that the seller faced due to them relying on that buyer's offer. So it's all case by case, but your buyer should be aware that any of the contingencies, most of them are really in there to protect the buyer. If the buyer is there willing to waive those contingencies for whatever reasons, they should be aware of the risks they take in doing so, because they're really going to be the only person that has something to lose by doing that.
So back to what today has been all about is the fact that you're the buyer agent in this situation. So the last and most important thing is them thinking that they can not bother putting in their offer, that this offer is subject to them selling their house. So this is where you have to wear 20 hats when you're a buyer agent. So you're explaining to them, you're selling your house. The money from the sale of your house goes through the cloud to the next transaction. If you don't bother putting that in your offer because there's going to be 13 offers and your offer would look nice and clean without it, how are you going to buy this house if you don't have the proceeds from the house that you currently own? Oh, well, I know it's going to sell in 2 days. No, that doesn't work. And you've got to put the brakes onto them, because unfortunately they're going to get emotional. Oh my gosh, I really love this house. I want this to be the best offer I could put forward. And you're like, if you really cannot go forward with this without the home sale contingency in there, don't do it. Now, you may get somebody who, if I can fairly say this, you may get somebody who's lived in their home for 30 years and they only owe $15,000 on their mortgage. Maybe in that case, you know, if they had that much equity, I don't know. It's just, you certainly never want to encourage them to make that risk. And they have to be fair to themselves. If they can't do it financially, and this is why, going backwards, having them talk to, when they sit down and talk to the loan officer is going to say, you have a $300,000 home. What equity do you have in that home? I recently sold a $300,000 home in Billerica. I was pretty sure they had lived there 30 years. They must not have a mortgage. They had refinanced twice and they were into it for all the money. They had no equity in it. Surprised the heck out of me, but you never know what somebody's circumstances are. And for them to sit down and have that talk with the loan officer is just going to put them in a much more comfortable position when they go to writing that offer at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon to understand what they're able to do.
Yeah.
It's a tough season coming up with you'll never know when you go in. Again, Stacy's book, The 7 Secrets, is great about understanding the bidding wars. You're never going to know the situation that you're in when you're up against multiple offers. And sometimes the buyers will say to you, well, what are the other offers? You're never going to know. You're never going to know the terms of them. It sometimes doesn't come down to exactly the price. It could come down to percentage down. It could come down to what the date of the closing is. Different things that are part of the structure of the offer. And Craig's comment before was right. All of the parts of the offer have to be agreed to. If they are not all agreed to, you don't have a fully agreed upon offer.
Exactly, and without all the essential terms agreed to, there's really no contract. I mean, you can have everything agreed on, but the purchase price, still no contract until you have that agreed on. Whether there's an issue as to the amount of escrow or really anything, buyer wants a closing date on February 5th, seller demands it be January 21st, you still don't have a contract. It's really having all the essentials, and really in looking at this, there's really not one term more important than the other type thing. It's looked together comprehensively. So
sometimes I will call the listing agent and say, I might say, we're thinking of writing an offer, but I might say, what closing date is your seller, what would he like? Because I have had in the springtime, sometime the seller will say, I'd really like to have my kids finish the school year out, so an end of June closing would win. Now let's say I've made that phone call and had that conversation. Remember what I said about communication? Maybe some of the other people writing offers haven't, and they put in their April 15th, and we put June 30th. We win, not because we were the highest price, but because we gave them the closing date that allowed them to have their kids finish school. So sometimes it isn't about the price.
Good communication between everybody involved.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
always a good saving grace.
Anyway, so a lot to keep in mind. Thank you very much, Craig, for helping us through all of this.
Sure, thanks for having me.
And thank you for everyone for listening today.